Economic nationalism is going to talk about trade as a tool of power. Now, I don't know that this is exactly what Trump is thinking when he's talking about the things he's talking about, but definitely it fits into that sort of camp of if China is getting the benefit from trade, that means that their economy is improving faster than our economy, which means their power is potentially growing faster than our power. So we shouldn't be doing this trade. That makes it sort of, from the position of the United States, then unfair. And this really revolves around this term we've talked about before, fungibility. Fungibility is the ability to take one type of power and transform it into another type of power. So if America is rich, then if it ever goes to war, not only does it already have a lot of stuff, but it should be able to convert its factories very quickly into military power. So economic power can be transformed into military power. Therefore, I should say, let me say it this way. For the realists, for the economic nationalists, the economy is not separate from national security. So then what the heck is diplomacy? Like, what is the State Department doing? If this is sort of how we talk about this, diplomacy then is essentially leveraging punishments and leveraging rewards. In other words, the economy, so we talked about economic liberalism wants to separate politics from the economy. But if the politics and the economy are very much interrelated, and the national security and the economy is very much interrelated, then not only is economics a tool for national security, economics can be a thing that you use to achieve your security goals. So you can essentially states do is essentially the theory here. States use their strong economy then to get other states to do what they want. They use it to get power. So, for example, economic sanctions. If you want to punish a state that maybe isn't helping with the war on terror, or punish a state that is, doing something else, then you can do economic sanctions. So we do this with Iran and North Korea and some other states like that, particularly states that are trying to get weapons of mass destruction. So you just cut trade as a punishment. Another thing is a reward. And what might rewards look like with this? And one of the things is this thing called most favored nation status. Different countries have different names for this idea. In the US, we call it most favored nation status. And every state has these things. So if economic sanctions will cut off trade as a punishment, then essentially the reward here is to give you extra things from the trade. So what this essentially means is if we recognize if the United States recognizes a state as having most favored nation status, they receive all the same trade privileges as the most favored state. In other words, sort of our best trading arrangement, you get that. It's like, I don't know, it's like going to a casino and getting like the gold card. You're not treated like just a regular guest. You get sort of the VIP treatment type thing. I don't know why I said casino. I don't know what that's got to do with anything. But that's going to include things like low trade barriers and high import quotas, meaning all the things that we would put in place for trade that would harm free trade, that would not allow for trade between two states, those things are going to be reduced for a most favored nation status. And this is sort of a reward for often. Now here's the thing: very rarely is the United States going to say, "We will reward you with MFN if you do this." It's never. We call that quid pro quo, and it's very rarely a quid pro quo type situation where if you do this, we'll do that. But that is sort of the way that it ends up happening, just not necessarily on paper. Okay, so now let's make this a little more political here. International economic policy, international trade policy, usually depends on votes. So we can crack open the state a little bit and talk about this. So let's talk about how economic nationalism sort of plays out in sort of domestic politics. So we're going to use the example of a tariff on cotton imports. Okay, so here's the deal. Countries like Burkina Faso and Mali, they can grow cotton way more efficiently than the United States can. So out on the global market, who's going to have cheaper cotton? Mali and Burkina Faso. Well, that's great. And again, according to all the things we're going to talk about here in a second, economically, that's way economically more efficient. The United States has a problem, though. The problem is that the United States has a lot of cotton farmers in states like South Carolina and things like that, where they have a disproportionate amount of the political power. And then because the Senate has 2 senators from each state, the senators from those states have a disproportionate amount of power. So whenever somebody comes into the Senate and says, you know what, we need to make free trade on cotton, these South Carolina senators walk in there and they say, no, you don't. We're going to veto this. Or not veto, but we're going to filibuster it. We're going to make sure that anybody who says that will never be a presidential candidate, things like that. And so nobody really brings it up. So we have, in the United States, subsidy on cotton exports. In other words, if you're a cotton farmer in the United States, the government pays you money to grow cotton, which makes your cotton out on the international market cheaper for you. All right, that's great. This ends up making U.S. cotton cheapest in the world. Now, this is great for U.S. cotton farmers, not great for global consumers of cotton, and definitely not great for countries like Mali, Burkina Faso. But here's the best thing about this. The United States government represents United States citizens, which includes the U.S. cotton farmers. It doesn't include Burkina Faso. They got their own government. They got their own problems. That's economic nationalism in a nutshell. Cotton farmers are going to vote for candidates that promise to keep the tariff or the subsidy. So here's the paradox of free trade. Okay, paradox of free trade. Take my word for it now, and we're going to talk about it here in a second. But free trade, both countries are better off overall with free trade. When I say better off here, I mean economic efficiency. They will both, and you're going to see some videos, you're going to see some things like that. It's the first 10 pages of every macroeconomics textbook. Both countries are better off from free trade. Free trade is going to create winners and it's going to create losers. So for example, if we do free trade on cotton, the winners are going to be Mali, Burkina Faso. The losers are going to be cotton farmers in the United States. All right, that's great. Now, who's got more power? The answer then becomes, well, depends on your states and things like that. The losers are going to compete politically to prevent free trade. Let me say it differently. Inside the United States, the winners of free trade is you, because cotton globally is going to be cheaper, which means the stuff you buy that has cotton is going to be cheaper overall. Now, it's only going to be cheaper by a few pennies, but it's still going to be cheaper. The losers are going to be U.S. cotton farmers who essentially will lose millions. So each one of us, there's millions of us that will gain a few pennies, okay? And then there's a few cotton farmers who will lose millions of dollars, okay? Now here's the thing. Which one of these two people, this guy or this guy, is more motivated to go to Congress and say, I would like you to have a tariff or I'd like you to remove a tariff? The answer is this guy is always more motivated than these guys. Like, you would love to have those cents, but are you really going to, lobby Congress for 5 cents off clothes? No. Is this person going to lobby Congress to protect their way of life and millions of dollars? Absolutely. So at Congress, what are they hearing about? They're hearing about this. The losers are going to compete politically to prevent free trade, and free trade ends up not occurring, and both countries are worse off. Now, when I say, again, worse off, I mean economically they're worse off. The cotton farmers, though, here are better off for sure. And because they have access to the political power and the way this thing is structured, they will get their way. I don't know if that's making sense or not. Plus, we'd have to think about the fact that this same process is happening. Let's imagine for just a second that Mali is sort of a democracy that works on voters and things like that, and the United States is a democracy. The cotton farmers in the U.S. and the cotton farmers in Mali, they're both sort of accessing their governments and sort of trying to get this to happen. So both of them, these guys want free trade, these guys don't want free trade. Mali can't pressure U.S. to do this, but the U.S. can do this because Mali can't really stop them can't stop the U.S. from doing it. They don't have the political power, they don't have the military power, the leverage, or anything like that. This becomes economic nationalism. If you go back to that article you read about the the supplies, that the United States would show up on the airport tarmac and make sure the supplies came to the United States, the coronavirus supplies came to the United States instead of going to other places. I mean, is that right? Should the richest state get what they want? And the answer is, that's, for a realist, that's just, it's not a question of should that be the case, it's a question of that's just the case. All right. So, and I should also point out the US president, let's just put Donald Trump on here, right? That's his hair. So the US president is not the president of humanity. The US president is not the president of the Mali or the Burkina Faso people. He is the president of the United States of America. He has a responsibility to help provide, economic growth, but he also has a responsibility to these cotton farmers, especially if they're voters. I shouldn't say responsibility. If he wants to get reelected, he's got to play those things sort of right. So economic nationalism, it makes sense in political terms. It may not make sense in economic terms, but in political terms, it makes enormous amount of sense. This then is fueled by nationalism, which we just talked about last week. So here's another example of this. Again, an example of free trade. There's this thing called outsourcing. Outsourcing is where a company finds out it can do something cheaper in a different country, so it outsources that stuff to a different country. So, for example, there was for the last 20 years, there's been outsourcing of call centers. Why pay Americans who work for, $20, that's probably too high, $15 an hour to answer phone calls when you can outsource the call center to a place like India and pay them, $8 an hour? I just saved, 50%. That just makes economic. If I'm a company, it'd be dumb for me not to do that. And again, both states are better off. The person in America who would be at a call center would then go find a different job that the U.S. is more competitive at, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Both states are economically better off, but the problem is, of course, that political argument of they took our jobs. If a factory gets outsourced to Mexico, theoretically, from an economics point of view, both countries are better off, everybody's better off. However, they took our jobs. And that nationalism element comes into this. When we combine this with the fungibility of economic nationalism, if their economy improves, so does their power. And so we get back to something we talked about early on in this class of relative gains. Both are better off economically, but not necessarily in terms of security. If China is better off economically, and that can be transformed into power and security, then all of a sudden China is now more secure than the United States, and that becomes a problem. So we might ask the question, is a trade war bad? And that's a question we're going to ask at the end here. So this is economic nationalism. It is definitely the position of the Trump administration in a lot of areas. Not across the board, but in a lot of areas it is. I think you will also see that as the effects of the coronavirus hits the economy more and more, you're going to see definitely states sort of going back to their own camps and being there'll still be a push for free trade, but there'll be a little bit more of this economic nationalism as every state's going to try and recover their economy from the sort of blow of the coronavirus. All right, we're going to talk about economic liberalism next.